I'm going to tell you 3 poker tips that are going to help turn your graph from this to this. And I've got a few secret resources that not many people know about. Before we jump into tip number 1, I should preface this video by saying this is not for high stakes players. If you're interested in cracking the Da Vinci Code, you should go check out Tom Hanks on Amazon Prime. But with that out of the way, let's get into tip number 1. So, our first tip to improve your poker win rate is to relearn your pre-flop game. That's right, and I know what you're thinking. When I heard other people telling me that you have to start at pre-flop, I was like, nah, I already know my chart. It's only pre-flop. There's no money in the pot. Who really cares? Then I went back and reviewed some of my biggest losing pots, and I realized that small pre-flop mistakes early on actually added up to be very big mistakes later on. An example of this is when we've got a weak ace and we hit our top pair, and then all of a sudden villain starts betting really big, and we kind of don't really want to fold because we have top pair, but we also have a really weak kicker. I think the best advice I can actually give is to put yourselves into positions to make easier decisions, and by improving your pre-flop game, that is one of the ways that we can do this. Now let me say, you don't have to be a perfect GTO robot to have a good pre-flop game, but it does help to build out a few mental shortcuts which can really help your pre-game. These are called heuristics. Now, some examples of heuristics or mental shortcuts are things like we want to play less offsuit hands because they have less equity. We want to raise more aggressively out of position with marginal hands so that we don't get to the flop. And when we're deep stacked, we want to play hands that have more nut making ability, like suited ace type hands. And there's obviously a lot more than just the ones that I've mentioned, but this just gives you an idea of the kind of things you can be thinking about. So, how do you relearn your pre-flop game? The good news is that it's 2023 and we don't have to print out 30 pages, kill a bunch of trees and stick them all over our walls like we used to do back in the day. It's actually way easier now, and there's a lot of tools and resources that I'm going to share with you to help with this. Many of you would be aware of GTO Wizard, which actually has some really great free pre-flop charts. They've also got a paid version, but you can get the pre-flop charts completely for free. I'll put a link in the description so you guys can go and check it out. But the great thing about GTO Wizard is that it also allows you to choose your stake. So you can have pre-flop charts that are more appropriate for your level, whether you're paying NL50 or NL500. But the secret tool that I use that probably many of you haven't heard of is Free Bet Range. This is a pre-flop viewer, editor, and tester, which you can get for completely free. I will put a link in the description as well for you guys to check out. The great thing about Free Bet Range is it's got a little shop section which you can actually get a bunch of free pre-defined ranges. Then all you have to do is import that range, go into the editor, and you can adjust the colors, the frequencies, and completely customize it exactly the way that you like it. Then, in order to really hone your skills, you can go into the trainer mode and you can actually select which range you'd like to use and then how you'd like to train. So you can either train hand by hand, practicing real pre-flop scenarios, or you can practice inputting specific ranges for a specific spot. If you want to get more poker tips like this, please do consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. I'm trying to create loads and loads of content for you guys to watch. Now, on to our next tip, and I've got a feeling that this one is going to trigger people a little bit. Tip number 2 is stop folding so much. Now, not everyone's going to be the same here, but in general, people at the lower stakes are folding way too much. Firstly, let's take a look at GTO Wizard and how often we should actually be defending versus a flop C-bet when we're out of possession in a 2-bet pot, because this is a fairly common spot. So you can see here, we're actually supposed to be calling over 50% of the time, which for some of you might be shocking, but what we should do is actually look through our database and find out if we're defending enough. So if you've got a tracking software like Poker Tracker or Hold'em Manager, then we can actually go through our database and look at a filter. Here's a filter that I previously created, and we can actually see that last year I was overfolding way too much. And as you can see here, I'm actually still folding too much, I guess because I'm a filthy nit. but it's definitely an improvement from last year. It's just a really good indication to see if you are overfolding. So how do we actually learn to defend properly? Well, you guessed it. We're going to use that thing before which we talked about called heuristics, where we try to create mental shortcuts about which types of hands we should call. Now for this specific example, when facing a c-bet, we could defend all pairs, all backdoors, and all draws. And this would get us to around 80% of the defend frequency that we actually need. Now, if we continue to study the spot, we'll actually learn more about the spots that we need to defend. But this will go a long way into helping lower that fold to c-bet number, which is where we need to get to. It may sound really, really obvious, but I bet you if you go through your database and you look at some of these hands, you'll find spots where you are overfolding, and those little spots over thousands and thousands of hands really make a big difference to your win rate. And the last thing I'll say about this tip, about making sure that we're not folding too much, is that when we don't fold, we also actually give ourselves the opportunity to bluff on later streets. And I think this is something that you see especially at the lower stakes, where people will automatically c-bet for 1/3 of the pot, and then they'll just give up if they don't have anything. So keep this in mind, and when we're in position, especially, we have opportunities to bluff and take away the pot, which increases our red line and ultimately will increase our win rate. And I would love to know in the comments below if you think you're still making the mistake of overfolding, because I know I still do. Okay, we are on to our third and final tip, which is going to help you improve your win rate today. Tip number 3 is all about recognizing earlier when you're not playing your A game. Now, I specifically use the word earlier because I think we all catch ourselves eventually not playing our A game and we realize that we're not playing that great, but sometimes it's a little bit too late and we've already given away our money. And if you want to know what this looks like, I suggest you watch the video above, which is me tilting my head off in a session, and I just had no idea that I was so deep into the tilt and I couldn't control it. Obviously this one is a little bit harder to quantify, but every time I go back and check my biggest losing sessions, often they're when I've been too tired or not really wanting to play but kind of force myself to play. And these are the sessions that we really want to avoid altogether. Now, the secret resource for this tip is a book that I read, or rather I actually listened to. It's called The Mental Game of Poker. It's by a guy called Jared Tendler, and it is an older book. It's like 10 years old now, but it is absolutely awesome. I can't recommend this one enough. I will put a link for it in the description. Get yourself the audiobook, listen to it while you run, while you do some exercise. And this book is really all about reaching the zone, getting in the zone every single time you play, and building rituals around how you can actually get into the zone. And it's poker specific. This guy's a performance coach, but he is talking specifically about poker. So I find it a really useful resource. But if you can't be bothered to listen to the whole book, I thought I'd give you a couple of the key things that you can look out for to recognize when you might not be playing your A game. These may be things like being really distracted, so doing other things while you're playing poker, whether it's watching videos or listening to music with lyrics. Some people can handle that while they play it, other people completely cannot. And the problem with being distracted, and one of the other signs that you might not be playing your A game, is that you actually can't remember what has happened on previous streets. This can also happen to people who multi-table, who are playing too many tables and they're not used to it. But basically, you get to the river and all of a sudden you face this donk jam and you're like, wait, what did he do on the turn? Or what happened on the flop? Or what happened pre-flop? Was it a 4-bet pot? Was it a 3-bet pot? And all of a sudden, your idea of what villain's range looks like, it's completely muddled. So it's very difficult to make these kind of focused calls or big laydowns in the moment. So be really aware of that. And one other sign, I think, is that you look for reasons to call. So you basically talk out loud or in your head and you convince yourself that you should be making this call. Obviously, you need to analyze the hand, but if you find yourself convincing yourself to call big bets, then you may be not on your A game. So without making this video too long, let's recap the 3 tips that we've talked about today. Tip number 1 is relearn your pre-flop strategy. Tip number 2 is stop folding so much, especially on the flop. And tip number 3 is recognizing earlier when you're not playing at your A game. I've never really created this kind of educational type of content, if you want to call it like that, before. But if you guys do like it, please let me know in the comments below so I can know whether I should make more of it or whether I should not spend hours and hours writing scripts and preparing the screen flows and doing everything for this video. But if you have made it all the way to the end of the video, firstly, thank you so much for watching. I do really appreciate it. I'm putting out heaps of videos at the moment and I'm really loving creating more content for you guys. And also, please do let me know in the comments which one of these tips you really identified with, because for me, all 3 of them are really important, but for some of you, it might just be 1 or 2. So do let me know. And that's all from me, guys. So start implementing these 3 tips today and start crushing. Catch you on the next one.